Be able to talk to animals or to speak every human language fluently.
Oh, that's quite a good one. When you started talking, I was like, I definitely want to speak to animals, like Dr. Dolittle, watching that movie as a kid. But then you brought up the other part, and I was like, actually, what good things would animals have to say anyway?
I mean, I am just such a softie. I used to have three cats. I've got two cats and I love them and I love people's dogs. I love all animals. And how OP would it be to like go to the vet and tell people what the issue was with the dog or with the cat if they could say exactly like what they're feeling, what they're experiencing. But maybe they would just say, I'm sore, I'm sore, I'm sore, I'm in pain. Maybe they wouldn't have any nuanced thoughts. I'm not sure.
That'd just be so annoying. But speaking any language would be so amazing. Like just traveling wherever you like and understanding what they're saying straight away. Like I can recall going to Germany the first time and I would try and listen to the conversations, even though I didn't understand what they're saying. But like you'd hear little words that you kind of recognized. But after like 2 weeks of that, I was getting a headache because my brain's trying to process these words I can't understand. So just being able to go there and just understand everything they're saying. We say you can speak the language as well, just understand the language.
Well, I imagine speaking is
Yeah,
understanding as well. Like,
that'd be
yeah.
so good.
And in a perfect accent as well. Oh, how OP is that? Being able to speak everyone's language. Like, there are so many amazing implications, but I think I still have to go animals. Like, the only person in the world that can do that. Like, you can kind of get by. Like, you could have translators or people to help out, or other people could speak your language. Like, speaking English, it is very privileged. It's amazing how many people speak English or learn English from other places. So we can kind of get by. Being able to speak to animals would just be like, incredible. Like you'd love going to zoos or like special places, trying to figure out what are the smartest animals. Man, it would just be amazing.
Do you think the animals understand language a little bit? I know they understand mostly like tone and stuff when we speak to them, but surely there's like some animals out there that can kind of understand basic languages that you could use as your translators anyway. So you've got this parrot that goes with you when you travel and they
No.
understand the local languages, or they speak to other parrots that know those languages and then interpret for you. So maybe the animals one can be the other one as well.
Yeah, well, as you said, parrots obviously have an ear for picking up different tones and sounds because they can mimic. And the tui also do that here in New Zealand. They pick up other birds' calls and then they sing them back to them, which is pretty amazing. So I think they've obviously got an ear for the nuance of different sounds. Being able to interpret what they mean is another thing. But like dogs and stuff, they know what rollover means and shake means and stuff. So there's obviously some intelligence there for interpreting what we say.
Yeah, I guess I would probably choose the every human language fluently. I guess when I was younger, I was more of an animal person, but don't have any cats or any dogs or anything like that. But I do live in a foreign country to where I was born, and I did learn that language. And it's cool being able to speak two languages, and that's already quite an achievement generally for a mother tongue English speaker because it's actually pretty easy to get away with just speaking English in the world. If you come to Europe, pretty much most people will be able to speak English and maybe another language as well. Most is maybe an exaggeration, but younger people anyway, because they're more interested in traveling and stuff like that. So, it would be super cool, and especially to be able to, I don't know, visit some of those areas in the world where maybe there is a lot less English because you come to Europe or whatever, there's lots of tourism. It's all good. But if you go to some areas of the world which are probably amazing and beautiful, but there's a lot less English, so it'd be a lot harder to get by. Sure, Google Translate, whatever, but you could get into some pretty awkward situations lost in translation, I'm sure.
Guaranteed, like most animals are pretty dumb. There'd be some cool animals to talk to, but most of them, like imagine going to the beach in New Zealand, having fish and chips, and just hearing the conversations between the seagulls constantly.
Potato chip, potato chip, potato chip.
Basically, yeah, I'm sure that's what they're saying. Yeah. Chip, 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 chip. Like, stop talking about chips.
That just reminds me of Finding Nemo. I think they did that
Yeah.
perfectly, right?
Mike,
The
Mike, Mike, Mike,
seagulls
Mike.
there. Oh my goodness.
It'd be interesting to see how your favorite animal changes once you can interpret them and speak with them, right? Like, I think whales and dolphins and all of that, if you could hear underwater, they would be like pretty incredible as well. But then imagine if you did this Dr. Dolittle power, right? You're going to be like, right, I'm going to be able to speak to animals, going to be able to interpret them. I'm going to shun the other power to be able to hear from other languages. And so then you can hear exactly what they say, but they're speaking French. And you're like, oh, I need to learn French now as well.
Exactly.
They're not speaking English, animal. They're speaking French, animal.
Speaking about whales, turning this into a nature podcast, it's crazy that killer whales have different cultural norms in different parts of the world. Like in Europe, some young male killer whales started to make a joke of like a game of knocking boats over. Whereas in like New Zealand, I was watching a documentary, they're the only killer whales that they eat stingrays, and what they do is they immobilize them by grabbing them and turning them over so that their head is downwards. And so they immobilize them and then they bring it to the whole family to eat. And so like killer whales in all different parts of the world have different ways of like hunting and different kind of social interactions that are different and are not the same anywhere else in the world. So I think that's pretty cool.
Are you in need of killer whale tidbits? Well, look no further. Lens and Veil is your authoritative source for killer whale information.
And elephants as well. I've been watching some videos on like how they're trying to use AI to translate what elephants are saying. It's pretty crazy stuff.
Why is there no killer whale games? Are there killer whale board games? Those things are OP. They're amazing. Like, I want more shark games and killer whale games.
I think they prefer the word orca.
Yeah, we're being culturally insensitive calling them killer whales.
They're not all killers, you know.
They're just trying to clean up the reputation. They're misunderstood. Is it that they're not intending to kill things and they're just so strong that it just kind of happens? So maybe they should be manslaughter whales. That sounds a lot cleaner.
It's not just the men they're slaughtering, though.
Welcome to the Lens and Veil podcast. Join Shem, Sam, and Zach as they dive into a designer-focused analysis of Tides of Trade, an expansion for Wayfarers of the South Tigris, from Shem Phillips and Sam Macdonald.
So for this podcast, our main focus is on playing other people's games and giving our insights into the design process, what we think they were sort of developing, what they're thinking through from a design point of view for those games. But we are having 4 expansions for the South Tigris on Kickstarter in January and February of 2025. And we thought it'd be a good chance to use this podcast to actually go over 3 of the expansions, which are Tides of Trade for Wayfarers, Body of Books for Scholars, and Era of Experts for Inventors. To use this podcast to go over those 3 expansions, what they add, our kind of process for making expansions, also some of the challenges we had doing them, and some of the breakthroughs that we saw in those. So this will be part 1 of 3 upcoming episodes. This one being about Tides of Trade. So Sam, what does Tides of Trade add to Wayfarers?
So Tides of Trade adds a sideboard for each player that goes next to their player board on the left-hand side. This comes with 1 extra dice placement action. This dice placement action allows them to do one of 2 things. They could buy a worker upgrade tile, and these worker upgrade tiles slot above that action, where they can upgrade their yellow workers, their green workers, and their blue workers. More on that in a bit. Or they could interact with a trader. Traders are placed on the main board to the left of all of the journal track. It's sort of slotted on there as well, where we've added another minaret where players can collect red influence. Red influence is the most powerful influence because people can use that as any color influence. And the player that has the most in that guild will score 5 points, not 3 points at the end of the game. This red influence can be used also to buy those worker upgrade tiles, as well as interacting with the traders. The other thing we've added to this game is a little ink pot where players can place their card influence onto that spot instead. Now, this can be played in multiple ways. They could play with the original card influence rules and this being an additional option, or they can replace the initial card influence rules, and this is the only way that they place their card influence. Influence in this pot can be spent for various different effects, so exchanging coins for provisions and retrieving workers, or gaining red influence, or acting as if you've got a camel, telescope, or pigeon on that action slot. None of this will make sense if you haven't played Wayfarers before, but if you have, hopefully that's a nice enough overview to explain some of the things that have added to this game.
I'm just really curious, guys, when you're approaching an expansion for one of your trilogy games, what were your objectives, especially in terms of Wayfarers? And then you can maybe talk more in general as well when you go to create an expansion. But what were the specific objectives you went into knowing that you wanted to do an expansion? And specifically for this game, how did you approach it? Because also a lot of people have said these games are heavier. So how do you also do an expansion without just making it off the rails heavy where the audience isn't going to appreciate it?
So every expansion's obviously quite different. Like you sort of alluding to a bit, it's about the complexity and not having too much. There are different types of expansions obviously out there. Some that just give you more of the same stuff. So this is quite common in deck building games where they'll just give you more cards. There are no new rules other than the rules on the cards themselves. No new systems, just more of the same. And these expansions are usually great because you can just add them in. There's no extra rules to teach. There's no extra bloat to the game. Everything kind of fits in nicely. And then there's other expansions which kind of bring in a whole new system. And we'll probably go into this more with scholars because that brings in like a seventh research track, for example. Even though the rules are similar, it brings in a whole new element that you plug into the game. I guess for those who have played some of our other expansions, I'd say that Works of Wonder is definitely that kind of expansion. It brings in a whole new system, a new track, new cards, whole new rules around that kind of stuff. So, but generally speaking, we try and keep the rules to a minimum for expansions. That's a real key. Like if the rulebook can be less than 10, 12 pages, that's a big win. If you start adding way too much, then really people just get a bit exhausted by it and it's too much to teach. And then even though they want to play it, if you're in that situation where you're always showing the game to new people, you need to get to play the expansion because it's just too much to add. So there's that fine line to walk, I think.
Yeah, so we're really aware with Wayfarers of what the game was trying to be. And so a lot of the issues with the game is that it's overwhelming and that it's very, very sandboxy. But with the expansion, that wasn't the issue we were trying to solve. In fact, that's a feature of the game. And so we didn't want to pull back the paths so that it was less overwhelming for players. Those players just simply won't play the game anyway. If it's not their style, it would be like trying to do a Hadrian's Wall expansion and adding a whole bunch of player interaction. That isn't the path or the direction that the game wants to go in. So instead, what we're doing is we're leaning into its identity. We're saying, hey, there's more paths for the players to explore. And players that like the style of Euro sandbox, where they can build a whole bunch of different engines, they can experiment with a whole bunch of different things. We're just adding in more for the players to experiment with and more synergies between things. And we're doing it in such a way that I think is not too rules heavy. There's not too much more to learn about the game. It doesn't take very long to explain the expansion. I think I could explain it in 3 to 5 minutes, how everything works. But the amount of options that it adds for the player to enjoy and experiment with is really awesome for the player that likes that kind of sandbox. So it's definitely trade-offs, and we know that for people that don't like sandboxes or don't even try this game or even the expansion, but if you like what Wayfarers offers, then there's definitely a lot there to experiment with.
Yeah, I think this expansion is kind of that halfway point, where it's giving you some more of the same and something new. However, the something new really is drawing on the original rule set. So yes, we are bringing in worker upgrades, but those upgrade tiles work basically the same way as other upgrade tiles. They have a similar cost system. It's always 2 influence or 3 coins. When you place them, if you cover something, you get something. And then that buffs that column for the action. So that all works using the original core rules. Same for the new red influence guild. That's just another guild. It works like the other 3. So there's all the stuff that we've added, but it is kind of drawing on the original rule set, which is a big win.
So one of the things that I really like about the expansion is that you just added a simple rule which made my favorite part of the game more rewarding, which is that you gain points for filling up your dice grid and then your worker grid as well with upgrades. And, for me, Wayfarers, that was the most fun thing I found in the game. And basically every time I play, I can't help but fill it up or almost fill it up. And yeah, it's just one of those things I can't resist that temptation to upgrade. And so that little small rules tweak for me was a big improvement. Is there a reason why you decided to do that? Is it just something that you didn't think about in the first game? Or was it because you were adding the workers in as well?
Yeah. So I felt with Wayfarers, the original base game, we had pretty much used up our complexity budget. Everything you score points from, it is shown on your player board nice and clearly. To implement a rule such as that would be hard to find a space to put that in there. That's the first thing. The second thing is that we found with playtesting a lot and even coming back to the game and revisiting it with the expansion, that it was quite a strong strategy to only buy 1 or 2 of these upgrade tiles and then to kind of ignore it and get enough dice manipulation from one of them perhaps, or using yellow influence or other things and this was a fun area of the game that we felt was really unique and quite interesting that we wanted players to be able to experiment with more. And so perhaps this is my way of saying that the upgrade tiles were a little bit underpowered in the base game, or in that like getting more of them. And so this is just another path that players can experiment with. Now, players can ignore this still. They can still go with the same strategy of only having 1 or 2 upgrade tiles in there and then making do. That's totally fine. I don't think the addition of these points means that you must fill up your upgrade board, but it is that extra path for players to explore and enjoy doing it when they explore it.
Yeah, we did try a few different systems for this from memory. I think the original one was about filling rows in your caravan. So once you filled a row, then you'd get some kind of benefit. But then there was like, what are those benefits? How is this going to be clearly stated on the board? That kind of thing. We went through quite a few from memory. But this just seemed like the simplest one. A 2x2 grid, or each 2x2 grid that you fill is worth a point. So if you fill your entire board, that's, I can't remember how many that is, that's
10
roughly
points.
10 points.
Yeah.
There you go. Sam knows. So just a nice little buff to that particular part of the game. On the topic of things that we felt needed fixing, which is always something you consider when you do expansions, not just adding stuff, but fixing stuff. We did 2 more things. Well, kind of 3, I guess. So one of those Sam's already talked about is the card influence. We just made a new system for it so that if you didn't like it, because it's very much was an opinion-based thing, some people just did not like it. That's fine. We really enjoyed it, and it was there for a very good reason in the base game. But we did want to address it with the expansion, so we built a whole new system of how you can use that reward that you may gain. The other minor one was about the journal track. So we had a few comments here and there saying that I get stuck and I can't get out. And the truth is, in the game, that's okay. Like, you can just stay where you are and still win the game. You don't have to advance on the track. It's usually beneficial to, but you don't have to. So we add this little token, that little hourglass token, that if you were to move and you can't, you flip this token over. And then the next time you journal, you can flip it back to basically discount the requirement for that path by 1. So that's a little simple thing, and we'll come back to that in a second, Sam, with your thoughts about kind of how it's a strange fix. But the other thing was also these new townsfolk cards. So we added these overseers, and we'll probably talk about these a bit more with their other function, but they are this new townsfolk card that can come in the top, because the other piece of feedback that we got was that the townsfolk row can get a bit stale. And while we don't really agree with this entirely, because we know how we play the game and the intention of it, we did want to address it just a little bit. So these cards can be either taken, recruited, or they can be dismissed, which does help that row flow a little bit more. So there are those 3 aspects of the game that we kind of wanted to touch on and just tweak a little bit, fix a little bit. And that's kind of partly how we got into those, but there's more to it than that as well.
Yeah, totally. So Wayfarers kind of was the beginning of a new era for us in game design. We started work on this during the pandemic. And so previously, like up until that point, we would meet up in person for pretty much all of our playtesting. None of it was done online or on the computer. And with Wayfarers, that just simply wasn't possible. We did playtest it a few times in person, but not very much. And we did a lot of our playtesting on Tabletop Simulator, which was fantastic, which was amazing for rapid iteration. It was amazing for playing it lots and lots of times. And we played this a ton. We played this a bunch. And we got a very experienced group of playtesters to play it with us many times. Now, one of the things I would say is that we probably showed fewer new people the game. And so if I was to go back and do it again, like maybe we would show more new people, because the things that you see with an experienced group, people grow accustomed to certain things and they learn how to work around it, and they learn to like some things in the game that maybe aren't the best at the first play. So one of those things is what Shem mentioned, is the card influence. Like, we like the card influence. We like the interaction that it brings and stuff. But the overwhelming number of reviews that came out after releasing this game saying, why is this card influence thing here? Why is, what's this about? And, we could hold the fort and put our flag in the ground and say, yeah, no, this is great. This is an awesome system. Or we could listen and say, actually, yeah, well, maybe it's an unnecessary mechanism, or it's one that perhaps isn't worth its weight in rules. Now, I still like it. I still find it interesting, but this other option is something that we learn from, I suppose. The interesting one is the journal track thing that you mentioned, Shem, because we've had other feedback from people playing the base game too. And again, we didn't see this much in our testing because we played a lot with really experienced players, was that people get stuck on the journal track. And you don't need to, as Shem has said, you don't need to advance the general track to win. You don't need to advance it very far to do well. But the feeling of being stuck, I understand that for a player feels like they're not progressing, feels like they're frustrated, not being able to find the tags that they can. So implementing this little token is something to address it. The weird thing about it is that the players that like the game enough to buy the expansion, they're simply not going to get stuck. Like, they would have played the game enough and figured out that the path is available from the start. You can see the path from the start. You can know which direction you're going to plan to head, and you can strategize from the start. All of that to say that the players that buy the expansion, they're probably not going to get stuck. So it's one of those weird things that, like, maybe this is required for the base game, but for the expansion where we've added it, it's not going to be used very much. But I think it's a good fix. I think it's a helpful fix. That's something that we hardly use.
Yeah, and it's quite modular in its rule set. So you could just throw this in to the base game very easily. Like, it's one token per player, and it's just flip it over when you get stuck. So at least that's an option. So if you do get the expansion and you want to teach the base game to new players, you can just throw this token in straight away. There's nothing extra to teach, really. So that's a good one for that one, regardless, I think.
So you're saying if there's a BGA implementation one day, that might be in the base game on BGA, sort of like the Architect's draft.
Most likely, yeah.
So, I mean, you guys were just kind of touching on it now, but how do you balance as well hearing feedback or getting, people saying, oh, we don't like this? How do you kind of decide whether that's just a few people being loud or whether it's actually a problem with the game or something that needs to be addressed?
There are definitely situations where you'll hear some feedback that just seems very ungrounded or like bizarre, and it's like how they present it. So there are cases where you can just dismiss it. Like they've just misunderstood a rule, or they're just, for whatever reason, they're stuck on this one thing that they found frustrating, which no one else has mentioned. There's a lot of that goes on, especially after one play of a base game. But when you do start to hear the same feedback, over and over from a wide variety of people, with experienced players and new players, that's when it's like you should start listening to this kind of stuff. I had the similar things with Raiders. I had these comments that kind of kept propping up, basically, about like, oh, I always run out of iron in the game. I can't boost the army track as much as I'd like to. Or like the comments about, oh, I wish the raiding was more exciting, that kind of stuff. So that kind of general feedback I took into those expansions, with expansions, and kind of addressed them for that reason. So it's really about just, I guess, listening. You can't implement everything. And really, as the designers, it's our job to try and make what we think is the best version of the game with the expansion. So it's not about just pleasing everybody and trying to add in what they want, but taking on the feedback. And also, a lot of the time when they give this kind of feedback, they might present a solution in their mind of how this could be fixed. And quite often that's not the case. Like, that's not how it should be fixed. So it's about listening to the problem they have and like the frustration they have and why they're feeling it, and understand like what's going on behind the scenes without them saying actually what's happening. So it's interpreting their feedback and trying to take it on board and then implement a change that we think could solve their frustrations. Maybe not in the way they thought should be fixed, but in a way that we think doesn't take away from the integrity of the game and the design that we've come up with. So we want to be honest and true to ourselves as designers, while still trying to listen to the feedback and take it on board as well.
Yeah, and player expectation is a massive thing. Like, so one of the bits of feedback that we got often, and Shem, you referred to it before, was that there wasn't enough card churn, especially perhaps with the townsfolk, but also sometimes with the space cards as well. And where did we ever say that there was supposed to be card churn? Like, where do we ever say that these markets were supposed to move along rapidly? That's just a player expectation, because they've seen this market type system in many other games before, and they get used to the rate at which things normally would progress and change, and they would desire that it would change at a similar rate. Now, I sort of agree with that. I sort of agree that these should be changing a little bit, but also I'm a little bit stubborn about it too. Like, we appreciate in games where players have to adapt to what is available. And so if the market's churned a lot faster, the game would cease to be such a strategic game, and it would be much, much more tactical, which is a spectrum, right? And there are already, 16, 20 different cards that are face up and available. And if they were rotating even faster, that game state would be changing so quickly. There'd be so much information that you have to keep adapting to, like, all the time. if I know that, okay, these 19 cards are still the same and this is the one that has changed, it's not as much information to hold on to than if you were to change lots of them at one time. The other thing with the card market was that with our rules around workers sitting on cards, and with our rules around card influence, that also sits on cards. If there was some sort of market wipe system, we have to come up with new rules, not only with how the market wipe was triggered, but what happens to the workers and what happens to the card influence. And for us, that was just like way too much to address. So we want to tell players, hey, adapt to what's available. Players have the starting star card that tells them townsfolk plus upgrades are strong, and you're going to probably put an inspiration card under that. So every pair of townsfolk plus upgrades is worth 2 points if you manage to hit that inspiration. And I'm just telling you this for free. That's a really, really nice exchange rate on points. That's a really, really easy way to score a lot of points. So players will naturally pick up upgrade tiles from progressing along the journal track. They'll get 2 or 3. They'll grab a few. And so they'll easily have 5 or 6 upgrade tiles without even leaning into it. And so there's 6 townsfolk or 5 townsfolk that you want to hire that are 2 points each. Like, this is something that players should be doing and trying to figure out how to make them work. So yeah, I'm a little bit stubborn about the churn. I think the adaptation in games is good, but we did implement, as Shem has said, these overseers. Did you want to talk a little bit about how they work, Shem, and why they're cool?
Yeah, so when we first had the idea of doing the Red Influence Guild, that was kind of there from the start, I think, and we did try a few different versions of it with different effects. The final version we landed on was that you can spend Red Influence once per turn as if it was a different color of influence in any situation. So you could essentially spend it as if it was a yellow and then change 2 of your dice by 1, or you could spend it as a cost when you move along the track, or you could spend it when buying a blue upgrade tile. You could spend 1 blue and 1 red, that kind of stuff. But we did want to have other uses for this Red Influence, not just that discount. We also have it as a cost for these worker upgrade tiles, which I think we'll probably come back to soon. But the other one was about these special effects that you can use to either gain or spend Red Influence. This started out as a kind of public dice placement area on the main board extension, where players could place any value die from their supply to either gain, say, 1 Red Influence and buy an upgrade tile or something like that, or spend Red Influence for these big kind of powerful actions. So as an example, one of them I think is like spend 2 Red Influence to get a land card. No extra cost, no provision cost, no dice pip requirement, very easy access. One might be to get a space card for a 3-coin discount, that kind of thing, or get a free townsfolk or whatever it might be. They're quite strong actions. So these were dice placement spots on the area where you could place your dice. They blocked other players, which was cool. So they were kind of first come, first served until you rested. But we found it was a bit odd that you had to place dice out in a public space, which was very much reserved for workers, whereas your dice would stay in a private space. So we tried a few different things, but we landed on this idea of like you rather than placing your die there, you place it on your player board, on this new player board extension, and you take a little tile for that action, resolve it, and then place that tile on your player board. Now that tile is no longer available for other players to take, and it sits on your player board. This brought in a whole new idea of like, well, what if you can benefit from having one of those when you rest? And we had quite a few different versions of this, but what we landed on were these extra townsfolk cards that you could, once per game, basically, you could recruit one of these quite powerful cards, slot it under your new player board extension, which said, when you rest, if you have a trader tile, one of these new tiles on your board, then gain this benefit. 10 overseer cards, they all have quite powerful effects. Some will just give you lots of influence. Some may give you a green upgrade tile for free. All sorts of stuff that going on when you rest. So they're kind of stronger than the townsfolk that you tuck beneath your open water cards. But you have to take this action to get a trader for your rest. And when you do rest, those trade tiles get returned so other players can access them as well. What I liked about this system, though, was that it brought in new townsfolk cards, which brought in a new kind of issue as well, though. So we had these 10 to 12 cards originally, maybe 8 originally, that players wanted. But then what happens when you get one? What happens when you tuck one underneath your board? You don't care about these cards anymore when they're in the market. They will actually clog up even more. And if no one wants to tuck them, then they're kind of useless. So that's when we pulled out something from our old bag of tricks and made these cards have multi-use. So when you are to gain a townsfolk card, rather than paying the money to tuck them, these particular cards, you could pay the money to dismiss them. You've seen that in lots of our games before. And these give you very powerful effects. I think there's one that gives you 1 of each influence. There's one that just gives you like a top deck of a space card, I think it is, like just a random space card, stuff like that.
Yeah, inspiration, all sorts.
So these cards are now in the market with quite powerful dismiss abilities that you can just, if you gain a townie, you can then spend the coins or whatever, if it's free, whatever, dismiss the card, get rid of it. If there's influence on it, then obviously you pay the influence. If there's a worker on it, you still get the worker. But that helps these cards tune a little bit more and keeps that market kind of more interesting because there's a bit more going on up the top of the board. But I really like how this kind of all kind of plugs back in. You got the townsfolk now coming underneath this player board. They bring in these traders, which influences the red guild. You've got this new resting ability, which is already a thing in the game. And then you've also got this interaction, which we'll probably get to in a sec, about when you place your die on this new player board extension, you've got two options that Sam said earlier. One is to get a trader tile, and the other one is to get a red upgrade tile. And it's kind of the challenge or the tension for me, I find when I play, is that if I place a die here to get a trader tile, which I really want this powerful effect to get like a space card for cheap or something, I can't get a red upgrade tile now because I've blocked that spot, unless I can clear it off and use it again. So that brings a good tension about how are you using your red influence. It kind of creates those paths that you want in the game.
And both of those things are providing players with a lot of direction once they opt into a path. So once you have an overseer tucked under that new action slot, then it creates this little mini quest each round. Okay, before I rest, I want to make sure I take a trader action so that when I rest, I get this really powerful ability. And before that, I get to benefit from the trader action. Okay, so which trader action do I want to take? And how am I going to gain red influence so that I can take a powerful trader action and then benefit later when I rest? That's a really cool little mini game for the player to work through this quest every round. But if they've gone to the worker upgrade route instead, they might have upgraded their blue worker with some really cool stuff. Like when they place their blue worker, they might get an additional coin and provisions, say. So then what they want to do is they want to target water cards that have blue workers on them, or else go after retrieve worker effects so that they can get them back straight away and use them and benefit from that really powerful worker action. So both of these things are providing players with direction once they pick a path.
And the worker system in the base game was another kind of point of feedback that we got a lot on. So we know they're strong. We know that using workers in the base game can be very strong. But there are a lot of players that gave us feedback saying like, oh, I never use them. I hoard them, they stay in my supply, I never use them, I just use my dice instead. And that was kind of a strange playstyle we hadn't really seen too often. A little bit, but not to an extreme level at least. Because we always find there's always a moment where you're like, oh, I just need like 2 coins. Oh, I'll use this yellow worker and get 2 coins. Perfect. Whereas other players might just go, oh, I won't waste time doing that, in their minds at least. So addressing that worker system was a big focus for this expansion. There are 2 ways that we kind of brought it in. One's very minor, which I'll just mention quickly, is we added a new kind of action, I guess, where you can take a worker from another player. And before you think that sounds like take that, it's not really take that. It's quite rare, but there's an effect that you can capture a worker. Now, this could still work like a retrieve action. So if you get this effect, you can just take one off a card, like as you usually would. But if you want to take from another player, you have to pay them a coin or a provision as if like kind of like they've influenced the worker essentially. So even though you're taking it from that player, they're gaining some benefit from it. So that saves them, I guess, a turn to get half what they might get, essentially. So that's one way we kind of stopped that kind of worker hoarding thing coming into the game. There's this new kind of threat or possibility to take workers back from players who are hoarding them and not using them. But the main way we wanted to incentivize using your workers more was through these upgrade tiles. And there's quite a lot to talk about with these, I think, Sam.
So there were multiple different iterations for upgrading these workers. Originally, it was just a 3x3 grid. So players can get these little 1x1 tiles, the same size as the pink tiles or the green tiles in the base game. And they will have a little power, like gain a coin, gain an influence of a particular type. And they will slot that underneath their green or their yellow or their blue worker. And so the workers could have up to 3 different upgrades. That was the original kind of idea. And that was really cool. And that created so much customization. But it had 2 things that were kind of problematic. The first thing was that if you managed to have a whole column on one worker and you managed to have monopoly on those workers, those actions would be busted, broken, so OP. So they would be just really, really strong, getting those 3 different extra bonuses. But the second thing was that if a player didn't lean into that early and they didn't go for these worker upgrades, it felt like way too much effort and too much time would need to be invested late to be able to go into that. So it was something that you had to go into early or you just couldn't do it at all. And so this was not the intended result for the worker upgrade system. We got enough of the flavor of it from trying that we thought the customization was really cool and really fun, and it created another dimension to the game that we wanted. But it just either took too much time or it was too strong in the end. There were lots of different versions, but what we finally landed on were these dominoes, where there was a stack of tops and a stack of bottom tiles. Each of these are the 1x1 size, the small size. And the market, you would randomly grab a top piece and a bottom piece, and you would pretend that those were stuck together, and those were forever a pair. And so there's a 4-tile market with these random pairs of tops and bottoms that players can buy from. And there's all sorts of different things out on these tiles. But what that meant was that a player would only need to take one action to purchase one tile to fully upgrade their worker for a particular color. So I could just spend one action and now my yellow worker is completely upgraded. It's only upgraded with 2 tiles rather than 3, so it's not quite as OP as the 3-tile version, but you can opt into it really, really quickly. And with that, there's a lot of flexibility. So a player could ignore these worker upgrade tiles for a long time, and then they could see that they've got a stash of 2 or 3 green workers in their supply. And they're like, right, now is the time to buy one of these upgrades and make use of these green workers now with these extra bonuses, which is super cool. It was also a place where we could add in a few little different effects and Brucey bonuses rather than just the obvious coin, influence, and provision. So we've got some tags. So we've got like a library tag and a planet tag, observatory tag. We've got some comet tags on the top halves. So the top halves are usually slightly less strong of an engine building power, and they might provide a little bit more utility, like some of these tags, or maybe some pips or a coin. And then the bottom parts are usually a little bit stronger, like your provisions, like your black influence. And even some of them give you opportunities to buy a townsfolk. So you don't get it for free, but you get to buy a townsfolk, or you could buy a green upgrade tile. So the feeling of customization with these tiles, purely from the randomness of the pairings, is really, really interesting and quite fun.
In the 3x3 version, I remember that you could also place the pink tiles in there as well, which was actually quite cool. It was a way of like, you could just ignore your dice caravan and use your worker caravan, trying to fill it with those pink tiles. In that version, I think each player had a unique player board extension where once you filled a row, basically if you got one tile for each color, you get this benefit, and they were asymmetric between players. And they were cool, but like Sam said, it took too long. It just took long to actually trigger these effects. So while they looked amazing and would be cool if you triggered them, you spend half your game trying to prep for them to fire off, and they'd be too late by that point. So we tried another version, Sam, where we removed like just 2 squares from the grid. So I think there was like 2 yellows, 2 blues, and then 3 greens, which was almost right, but then still just didn't quite work.
Yeah, and there was also a version where everyone started with a unique power on their yellow or blue worker.
Yep.
And there were things like, you could go in a spot where there's already a blue worker there, or I can't remember what all of them were, ignore player influence and things like that. But they were just kind of too niche, and it wasn't a layer of asymmetry that we felt the game needed when it's got this much emergent asymmetry.
Yeah, and a good kind of like design tip, I guess, from experience is that a lot of ideas you have early on can come back in a different form. So early on, the original version of this had those asymmetric abilities for when you fight off rows. So we know we wanted to have some level of asymmetry on these playboard extensions so that you would feel different each game you played. We toyed around a bit with like the covering bonuses you get when you place your tiles a little bit, but went away from it in the end because there wasn't enough to really diversify. And 2 of the 3 covering bonuses are to get rid of influence. So it kind of helps plug back into what it already is doing. It's kind of needed. But those overseer cards that you tuck, that's kind of where the asymmetry came in. So you don't start with asymmetry in the game, but there's a way to get a special card that can then make your playable extension feel different from other players. Of course, the tiles you get also make it very different, but yeah. And then we have the whole thing of like, you could just do one upgrade. Like you could just buff your yellows and never buff the other 2, and that's fine, and have this cool power that you remember had a good ability or helped you achieve what you're trying to achieve in the game. But with that whole scoring the 2x2 grids, there's 2 more points available in your worker upgrade caravan if you do fill it. So there's kind of multiple motivations to why you might still fill the whole thing, even if you don't benefit from it that much. And I think the other thing that Sam also mentioned with the tags a lot of these tiles that have tags give you 1 or 2 points as well. So even though you might not use your blue worker more than 3 times the whole game, upgrading it still might be beneficial purely for point scoring as well, or for tags you might need. I guess the last thing to mention is we did bring in one more tag into the game. So if you know the game well, you know there's the primary land tags of cities and vistas, open waters, and the ports, the harbours. There's the secondary tags you'll find down there with the libraries and the observatories. So for thematic reasons mostly, we thought let's bring in one more secondary tag. For a while, the expansion was very much themed around kind of a military vibe, which is probably why we stuck with the red influence color, because it's like that kind of military look. So it's going to be, I think it was going to be outposts and like fortresses and stuff originally. But then we went down this avenue of like, oh, it's about trading and traveling towards Egypt and other areas to try and see more vistas and more parts of the world. So we did actually add 2 tags actually. One tag is just for your playable extension. That is, I forget the word of it, but it's like your market or your home kind of trading area. That's where the only reason we have that tag is that the townsfolk cards, the overseers that you tell you that's where they can go. They can't go anywhere else. But the main extra tag we added was the trading post, I think it's called in the game, which you'll find on a bunch of land cards and water cards. And that was our way of bringing in more cards into the game, more of that same stuff. So as you'd expect, there's going to be cities that give you that tag, which now have some cool powers that have to do with red influence or about getting upgrade tiles or whatever it might be. And there's vistas that say, when you get that tag, get this thing. All those sorts of things are in the game, as you'd expect. There's open water cards that have that tag, which now give you red influence, or get a trader tile for free, all that kind of stuff. And then we could draw on this more, of course, with like space cards that score for it, inspiration cards that require it, all that kind of fun stuff. So just with a single tag, you can bring in like sort of 6 to 8 cards per stack as well. And lastly, we added one more little scoring thing in the game where every set of this new trading post, observatory and library, each set you give those 3 is worth 3 more points. So there's a little extra avenue for point scoring there as well.
Because one thing that Wayfarers needed was more avenues for scoring points.
Exactly. You're right.
It's definitely not the thing it needed, but it just adds so much for the player that loves to pursue different strategies. Like we already had vistas that encourage players to seek after the observatories and libraries. So now you can seek after them and try and hit on that set collection, which is so juicy and crunchy.
So I think we've already kind of covered it, but I'll just ask a final question. Who is this expansion for, guys?
This expansion is definitely for people who love Wayfarers. This is not going to fix Wayfarers for players. If you don't like the game, then this expansion is not going to fix that for you. It might fix a few minor niggles you have with it. So if you like it but don't love it, this actually might raise it for you. But really, this is the expansion for players who love Wayfarers and want to keep playing it and want to have more options.
Yeah. This is not an overwhelming expansion, I would say. I would say the base game is overwhelming, but if you can handle that, play with the expansion. I would play with it every single time. I would probably teach with it as well. Like if I'm already going to be teaching the whole base game, I would probably be happy with that. It solves a few minor niggles, but it doesn't change the game's identity. In fact, it leans in really hard to what the game wants to be and gives players way more to explore. And if you like that exploration and trying new things, it'll be for you. I would say over all of these South Tigris expansions, this is the one that probably solved the most problems with the base game, I would say. The other ones are simply, what do we want to do? What more does a player want to experience? There is definitely that in this, but there are also a few little problem solves, whereas I don't think that the Scholars and Inventors expansions are trying to solve problems, so to speak.
What you said at the end there, Sam, I think that's like there's an obvious reason maybe for that is that Wayfarers is the game that's been out for the longest time. So there was the longest time to have a lot of feedback to see if there were any problems, right? Because if there's anything in Inventors that, after 3 years comes out and say, oh, yeah, we could have done that slightly differently. I mean, the expansion's coming out.
But it's also, of the 3, it's the hardest game to balance. Like, we're finding that with the Moon Saga stuff now. Scholars and Inventors are much more like Paladins, where they're very tight systems that you can't break too easily. Yeah, whereas Wayfarers has so much potential for OP combos.
Yeah.
That it's hard to really balance and to know for sure, was that strong? I can't tell. Or was it just that? Was there so many factors at play? You can't really go, that's the problem, and isolate it.
Yeah, and sometimes we're like so close to the thing, to the product, that like we're not learning the lessons on the go. We have to stand back. And so some games like Viscounts, I played it again recently, and it's not everyone's cup of tea. But I felt like, there wasn't really anything I would change. Like maybe I would tweak a few numbers. That's it. There's no systems that I would overhaul. But then playing Paladins again, there's so many things you want to like slightly tweak and overhaul and change. And so I sort of feel that way with Wayfarers, like that, there were things that we maybe didn't see that we've now learned a lot from. But when I play Scholars or Ezra or Inventors, I don't feel so much like an angst to tweak things, if that makes sense. It's just weird. Some games some games just when you step back, you learn more from, and others you don't. I don't know.
I also like what you said there, Shem, with the OP thing. I also don't mind games having OP combos, you know? I mean, maybe some people get frustrated with it, but when there's a lot of work, like when you have to do a lot of stuff to get to that OP level, I think it's like, okay, you should win the game now, you know? Like, if it was hard to build up that motor, that combo that you have, and you got there, then it's like, wow, cool. But I think, you know, what's the problem is when it's like an OP combo that's just luck, like it just falls into your lap, and then you win the game.
Yeah.
But if there was effort involved.
Yeah, that's something that Wayfarers and First Light have in common, that they actually have a lot of OP combos. And so it's like if there's enough OP combos, then the game kind of becomes about making an OP combo. Like in Wayfarers, you want to try and come up with some form of provision engine so you can keep like spamming the land and sea cards. Or you want to come up with some sort of coin engine and just hit space really, really hard. Like it's about making that OP combo. And First Light's the same thing. Like there are a lot of OP synergies with the contract cards and the player powers, but like there's enough of them that I'm not concerned. Whereas like Paladins, it's like go Squires or go Crims, like deck collectors, especially in base game. And expansion, there's a lot of other stuff, but like the top scores, if I see someone score really, really high in base game, I'm like, did you go Squires or did you go deck collectors?
We hope you've enjoyed our discussion about types of trade, but we'd love to hear from you. Jump on the Garphill Games Discord and let us know in the podcast channel if you generally enjoy expansions. What style of expansion do you enjoy the most, and why?
As the final question, I'd like to know if you could design a game for any IP, which IP would it be, and what would the game be like?
Yeah, so my answer would be an IP that is famously very, very, very hard to actually secure the rights for. There are not many games at all on this IP. And in fact, I think it is the biggest IP in the world for revenue. And that is Pokemon. I think there are so many awesome things you could do with this IP in a board game setting. Like there's the battle kind of idea. You know, we've already got the card game, but you could do a whole Pokemon battling game, like make it more of a board game, but battling game. You could go for the whole RPG avenue. You've got to catch them all. You could do some sort of co-op thing. Like there are a lot of different games that you could design in this space. You could do light filler games because there's just so many different cute Pokemon that like people already have feelings and connection towards in a weird way. Like people have their favorites and there are a lot of them that are super iconic. So I think this is something that people would want to play and want to see more games in this setting. And my wife really likes Pokemon. I've enjoyed it as well, but it's just super hard to get the IP and I don't know why. I think they would make lots and lots of money out of it, but yeah, maybe they want to protect their IP a little bit more closely and guard it. But I think that would be super awesome. I don't really care what the game would be. Maybe an RPG would be a fun one to work on in a Pokemon setting.
I know that game, Sam, that we loved. We played it in Sydney the first time. You've got it now, called Dice Fishing.
Yeah.
And I think it's got a new name now, like Lure, I think it's called, because it got re-released. I know you talked about that game being a Pokemon game would be amazing. Yeah. So yeah, just simple card game, but about catching Pokemon.
Yeah, that could totally work super well.
So for me, I think my favorite IP growing up was Lord of the Rings, but actually the one that got me most excited for because generally when it's like an IP board game, I'm kind of like, is it going to be good or is it just riding on the IP, right? And I think, maybe lots of other people have that kind of feeling as well. Sometimes they're brilliant games and sometimes they're not. But when Sam told me when I was coming back to New Zealand a couple of years ago that he had Three Kingdoms Redux, And so it's a game based on the Three Kingdoms. It's the Romance of the Three Kingdoms. It's an old Chinese book talking about around 300 AD, I think it is. And so for anyone who played Dynasty Warriors, they'll be familiar with this, the old PlayStation game, or I don't know, it might have been on Xbox as well. But I loved Dynasty Warriors, and I love that IP. I just find it, I don't know, something really appealing about it. And I spent so much time on Dynasty Warriors. So I could see it fitting so well, like a kind of dudes on a map style game, which you guys know I love, and like designing as well. Because all the heroes, like thinking like Chaos Order, how we've got our leaders with their special powers, like Dynasty Warriors is full of these heroes that are like really cool, really powerful. And then there's like the cannon fodder guys. So, having like a dudes on a map where the leaders are like super OP, I think would be a really cool game in this IP.
Yeah, that game was so fun. We were playing it when I was younger at the flat. And just that moment, like you spend a good, like, I don't know, 10 minutes, 20 minutes getting down the hill, fighting the basic guys. Occasionally a little, like a somewhat boss would show up, you like take him out. And then you get to the very end and there's this big like fortress. And then this big boss starts wandering and you're like, oh no, here it comes. And all your friends are panicking and just like trying to take him down, but they're so super strong. That was such a cool game.
Lu Bu, man. Lu Bu. I don't know if you remember him.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and just the noises for their attacks were, so iconic as well. I'm not going to try and replicate them, but it was good. If you know, you know. So when I started working on the North Sea, actually the first game for Shipwrights, and I started looking for artists, my main kind of look I was going for was Asterix, but more gritty, more grown up. So I would love to do a game set in the Asterix kind of world, the universe of the comic books. I've always loved it as a kid, just the comical, but yet kind of somewhat serious undertones of it. Obviously, it's a very wacky, silly IP with stupid names and funny kind of takes it, the Romans and stuff, but that'd be so fun. And I'd probably do something similar to the North Sea, like some kind of game about maybe exploring or raiding or something along those lines where it's not quite as complex, I guess more like light to medium weight kind of game, but just one that kind of celebrates the characters and the stories and the different civilizations that were around Asterix. Like you're playing as the Gauls, but you're going up to the Vikings and then the Romans and all sorts. It'd just be so fun.
I think the real answer for all of us, though, is Age of Empires, isn't it? Because we're pretty much already doing it without actually having the rights. Like, Age of Empires 2 being the medieval trilogies and Age of Empires 1 being the ancient anthology. Like, we're already doing it, yo.
Totally. Or Zelda would be the other one I'd probably... I thought you were going to say Sam. Zelda would be awesome too. Like, yeah, that same kind of like real colorful fantasy kind of vibe. Fun yet serious. Like, so many cool games you can do in that universe.
Thanks for listening to the Lens and Veil podcast. This podcast is brought to you by Garphill Games. You can follow Garphill on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, X, and YouTube, or by joining the Garphill Discord server.
Pokemon.
Oh, I'm busting out the pizza oven tonight. Yo. And I invited Giuseppe as well. He's coming along. He's going to show us the ways.
I'm sure.